Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial, and today we're going to talk about the ship's booklet of general plans. If you would like to follow along from home, check the link in the description below for a website run by a volunteer that has a number of the booklets of general plans for Iowa-class battleships and also a bunch of other ships. The one that we're primarily using here is the USS New Jersey's 1982 booklet of general plans. Although we do have another copy here which does not show up on that website. But here's where we start from. So all of the stuff on that website was scanned by a volunteer out on the submarine Pompano. And he maintains that website with all of these resources that he has gotten scanned and helps support museum ships in that way. But this video is a companion to the video that we filmed a while ago, also linked in the description, about how to read a bullseye. So every room on the ship has a specific name. And because those names change over time, it also has a number. And that number is not supposed to change over time, although with the Iowa-class battleships it does. But that number allows you to go through and look up the room on your booklet of general plans.
2 is going to tell you what level the ship you're on. So we are on second deck right now. We're one deck down from the main deck. There's 0 before it. It means you're above the main deck. 68 is going to tell you what your frame number is. So each frame has is 4 feet apart from each other. We have a whole video on frame numbers if you want the nitty-gritty details about how they're not all actually 4 feet apart from each other. But it's going to tell you about how far back into the ship you are from the front. And the frame number is always going to be the one furthest forward, closest towards the front of the ship, because there are many frames that pass through each compartment. That's what the second line is here, frame 68 through 74. 1 here is just going to tell you whether you're on port or starboard. This compartment, it's an L, means it's a living space. There's different letters that you can have as an option there, and really it's just telling you what the space is used as. So berthing compartments, passageways, these are all living spaces. But you might see a letter that signifies that it's a magazine or a fuel space or a void space. And for us, we have a 4th line on most of our bullseyes on this ship. And that's not something you're necessarily going to find on most ships. Many museum ships, however. And really what it is this is the compartment number for World War II. So when they first built the ship, this is the compartment number system that they were using. But they phased that system out at the end of World War II and phased in this more complete system. And the new sailors didn't know how to read the old system, but the old system is what's on the original blueprints, so they kept both. And the old system is fairly simple. The first letter is going to tell you which quarter of the ship you're in. A, B, C, and D. We're in the first quarter of the ship forward. The next number is going to tell you again, we're on second deck. And the 2 numbers that come after that are interesting. Instead of doing it by frame number and then port or starboard, it's just the 14th compartment on second deck, section A. So it's not a great identifier of exactly where you are, but there's only so many compartments. It gives you a good idea of where you are. And again, the 1 is going to tell you that we are on the starboard side of the ship, and L for living space. So they're not super different systems, but the newer system is a little bit more accurate.
So before we get started, BGPs like this one do not exist for every configuration of the ship, at least not that I know of. So I have never seen an actual World War II booklet of general plans for the Iowa-class battleships. They were definitely made. I suspect as changes are made, sometimes they just update the BGPs directly. I suspect all the World War II ones became the 1950s ones. And I have seen at least 2 different 1950s booklets of general plans. Interestingly, They are specifically Wisconsin and Missouri. Now, the Missouri 1951 makes sense. At that point, she was still the only Iowa in service, but usually you would have the lead ship of the class featured in the BGP. So the fact that there's a Wisconsin plan from, I think it's 1956, is kind of interesting. In the 1980s, New Jersey was brought back first, and so they made a book of general plans for her, the 1982 plans. New Jersey remains in service all the way up until 1991, and a number of changes are made to these plans. But this book is not updated at all. There are books of general plans released for some of the other Iowas as they're put into commission, but those ships are slightly different because they didn't receive the Vietnam modernizations that New Jersey got. So when New Jersey was reactivated for Vietnam, they made this book of general plans, which has only recently become known. It was mailed in with a donation not too long ago. So it hasn't been scanned. You can't find it anywhere. But it's really interesting. They tend to update an old BGP when they're doing a new one. For New Jersey's 1980s booklet of general plans, they took some blueprint of, or some booklet about Iowa from presumably the 1950s that I have not seen, and they modified it for this. Well, how do we know that it's Iowa? There are some weird Iowa-specific things going on here. So for those of you who don't know, Iowa and New Jersey were built as a pair, and then a year later, Missouri and Wisconsin were built as a pair, and the later two received some upgrades that the first two did not, such as thicker armored bulkheads forward and aft, where the store and the library and some other compartments was all shifted in the later ships for various reasons. And so that might be why you see Missouri, Wisconsin blueprints and Iowa and New Jersey getting their own blueprints, to answer my earlier question I had for myself. But for whatever reason, the 1980s blueprint shows some weird Iowa-specific things that don't pertain to New Jersey, such as the admiral's level of the conning tower shows up in here, and some other weird stuff. So it doesn't look like they took the Vietnam-era plans, which would have been the most recent and most up-to-date, but probably also the narrowest circulation. They found some older set of plans and updated them to the 1980s, mostly accurate. So, what is the difference between a booklet of general plans and a blueprint? The blueprints tend to be blue. Now, the blueprints, they aren't all blue. Some of them are printed on thinner paper like this, or microfiche or other stuff. But the blueprints tend to be much more specific. This one room or this one system. Here's all the wiring associated with this system, or all the piping associated with this. And much less, there isn't a blueprint of the entire ship. The booklet of the general plans serves as that, and it's really more of a reference. Somebody just mentioned this room. What is this room? Let's open that up. An additional resource that's similar to the booklet of general plans and a blueprint are the damage control plates. On damage control plates like these, looking at the ship, we can see our compartment right there, which tells me it's one of the engine rooms or the fire rooms. A large below-deck space. If there's flooding there, we're going to need to do something about it. Now, the individual pages of the BGP are plates. The damage control diagrams are also known as plates. And those are also system-specific, and they tend to show the whole ship. It might take 2 sheets, but they tend to show the whole ship and where various systems go throughout there, and where shutoff valves are and whatnot. And there's a different plate for each major system. Aviation gasoline, regular propulsion gasoline, steam lines, fire lines, all that sort of stuff. and that is specifically so that damage control parties can log and see, all right, there is a cutoff valve slightly up the line from where this leak is. We can dispatch a party there to fix it. So all of these things look a lot like blueprints and might be collectively called blueprints, but they are not specifically. The blueprints are used primarily to build the ship, and then they're maintained in the log office for if you have to do maintenance. The booklet of general plans is more of a reference, and the damage control plates are an everyday thing that you might need to use. DC plates tend to be laminated. The other ones are not. By the 1980s, the blueprints had, at least the ones they were using, had largely been converted to microfiche, so you could pretty rapidly go through and look at them, and there are a number of locations on this ship that have microfiche readers. So let's look at the booklet here and what you can see in it. This one is missing a couple of pages. The first 2 pages in particular seem to have been ripped off. I don't know if that was just because the first 2 pages are boring and this was being used by an individual, or if they got pulled off in the course of work, or what the case is. But our Vietnam BGP here has the cover page, and that's just telling you that this is for battleship number 62. It's got plate 1 of 1. These were all marked confidential at one point, and then they are stricken through. Here, somebody did it with a Sharpie. On this one, they actually, looks like, put a line through it. And over here, it says declassified, and it cites the source that allowed them to declassify. And it's got the date, 24 July, 1981. So it's really interesting that they declassified the Vietnam plans basically within 6 months of taking New Jersey in hand to update her for the 80s. I'm not sure why that is. I feel like you declassify these, and now the Soviet Union has a relatively accurate look at your ships if they can get a hold of them. Because while they made a number of updates in the 80s, they aren't changing the hull or the armor or any of that stuff. Although, with Iowa-class battleships, they've been around for a long time and they're fairly well known. And then it's got the list of all of the plates. This one has 15 pages. This one is supposed to have 18, although it's missing at least 2 of them. And basically, it's the different decks. You've got a cover sheet, which is what the front page is. You've got the general dimension data, which is page 2 in here, which is just your various tabulations and stuff, where there are lights, where there are accommodations. And then you go into an actual deck by deck. Outboard profile, which is what this is showing, page 3. So you're seeing the side of the ship with the actual plating on it. And so this is telling you what are the various antennas, what are the various lights, and what are the heights of different things. So the top of the mast is 207 foot, 7 inches ABL, or above bottom line, which would be this line here at the keel, or excuse me, baseline. And then the next page is the inboard profile, much the same as the outboard profile, except it's showing you, if you cut the ship right in half along the center line, these are the various rooms and other stuff that you could see in there. Really cool view, although I don't tend to use these sheets too much. For what I do, you got to get down into the weeds and go to the specific levels. So after that, you've got the various bridge levels. You've got the first and second decker on one page, and then the other decks going all the way down. And interestingly, it also includes different pages for the inner bottom and third bottom, the part of the triple bottom system. So they have pages in there that show you what the various tanks are that are down there and some of the framing. So let's open up to a random page in here. And here we are at the second and third platform level. An Iowa-class battleship has 12 stories in the superstructure and 7 stories in the hull. Like we talk about in the in the bullseye video, as you go up, it becomes O1 level, O2 level, so on and so forth. As you go down from main deck, which is 1, goes 2, 3, 4. So we're currently on second deck, right below main deck. This is where my office is. And as you go down, it's first, second, third deck, and then the numbering stays the same, but the name changes. Fourth deck is actually the first platform level. Fifth deck, the second platform, which is what you're seeing here. Sixth deck is the third platform, but that only exists forward of frame 50. Once you get to the forward armored bulkhead, that disappears. And so the third platform is on the same page as the second platform, and it is just frame 50 and forward here. Now, it doesn't exist outside the armor back aft because the curve of the hull is going up. There isn't room for it. And forward, you've not only got all that deck space, but you've got the bow curving up, so you've got even more. So there was room for this platform deck up there, which tends to be a lot of berthing spaces and storage areas, and nothing too spectacular. And then the very bottom of the ship, the hold level, is 7th deck. So the very bottom compartment tends to always be 7th deck, even when you go back aft and the hull starts to curve up, and you are definitely not as deep as you were all the way forward at 7th deck. Even beneath the engineering spaces, where there are nominally only 6 decks, the lowest one is always 7th. So you would go straight from 5th to 7th because of that third platform level being out of sight, out of mind. Now, that brings us to some other complications. The engineering spaces have graded platforms around them at various points. They are not necessarily level with the decks. So when you open up your BGP and you're looking in, here are all the engineering spaces. Basically everything between turret number 2 and turret number 3 are engineering spaces. In the BGPs, they show up as big open boxes. You can also see this center line running down. That is not a bulkhead. That is just showing you frame numbers. So there is no centerline bulkhead. These engineering spaces go the full width of the compartment. But because they don't really show up on these spaces, they're not all that visible. Or you don't see any of the equipment there. It's just an open space. When you get down to the hold level, I think it shows you some of the engineering stuff. All right, so there are a number of ways that these might be helpful to you or interesting to you, but what I want to talk about is how are they helpful for our channel. So typically when we go into deep dark places in the ship, we'll throw up a clip of this booklet general plans. And now this thing is about 6 feet long per page. So obviously we're not showing you the whole thing. We tend to, on our videos, to show you the inboard profile. That's that centerline cutaway of the ship to show where we are on what level. And I always try to start with, we are on second deck. So we are right around frame 68 here, which is near my office. So we show you the inboard cutaway section of where we are, so you can see we're on second deck, and then we show you the top view, and then you'll get a cutaway of just a section of this print to show you roughly where you are. So how do you orient yourself here with one of these plans? Well, in the superstructure, it's relatively easy. Those tend to be much smaller segments. Here, when you get down into the hull, you might get a wide enough area that you can see it's tapering, and the Iowas do taper very distinctly towards the bow, whereas they stay very full towards the stern. And you may get nothing in the shot, like here it is up forward, and you can see both sides of the bow as it tapers. That gives you a pretty idea you're pretty far forward. As you start to go aft, when the hull widens, we'll almost always include part of a turret barbette. So in these plans, you can see there are some big circles drawn in. Those are the armored barbettes that the gun turrets sit on. So with your view of the ship you have in your head, you know roughly where the various gun turrets are. That helps orient you. You might also see those big open squares in the middle of the room. So from third deck down, those are the engine rooms, and you know roughly where you are around the middle of the ship because of those. As you go up from there, you've got the various uptake spaces, which is what we're looking at here, where the exhaust from the engine rooms goes up. So that should help you find roughly where you are just in your head at a glance. To get more information, you want to read the compartment numbers. So here's a random room I just picked, the A, B, and M division office. No idea what that is. I don't believe that's what that space is used for anymore. Well, A, B, and M divisions are some of the various engineering divisions. Each individual compartment on here will have both a name and then that numbering system that lets you orient yourself in 3 dimensions. So if you're one of our regular viewers, hopefully you've saved these Booklet of General Plans to your computer. We can only show so much on a screen at one time that you can actually read, so we do have to do a pretty narrow cutaway, but I would recommend open up your own copy and check out where you are on that so you can orient yourself even better. So obviously things like these were useful for shipyards and the ship's crew when the ship was in service. How do we as a museum use them? Well, remember this is a ship that was in service off and on from 1943 up until 1991. During that time, huge numbers of changes were made to the ship. So we know what the ship looked like in 1991 pretty well, although there are some spaces which were almost completely gutted either by the Navy or by earlier generations of the museum that we're a little less sure about, but we have a pretty good idea of what the ship looks like now. The problem was people show up every day with artifacts or stories about their relatives who served on board and specific spaces that they want to see or that they remember or where this piece of equipment needs to be returned to. And that just might not be the same as what it's used for now. Typically, engineering spaces, gunnery spaces, those don't change at all. But the various offices, the berthing spaces, those go through wild changes throughout time. And maybe they're used for the same thing. This is always a storage space. But what specifically? Was it the chaplain's storage? Was it the landing force storage? Was it gunnery stores? It changes. It changes a couple times throughout individual commissioning periods. Like I said earlier, this is roughly around 1982 when the ship is recommissioned. By 1991, there are whole spaces in here which do not show up correctly because they've been changed. And so when we go through these and look, it helps us narrow it down. If you can say, my uncle was on here at X time period from 1982 to 1984, then I know, okay, I go to this Booklet of General Plans. And some of the stuff you say might help me narrow it down. If you can remember what division he was in or what his rating was, I can probably track down some of the spaces he was likely to work in. You ask where specifically he slept. Different berthing compartments are set up for different divisions, and those change over time, and that is not listed on the Booklet of General Plans. And it's not the same for different Iowa-class battleships. So like this berthing compartment up here may be for B division on Battleship New Jersey. On our sister ship Iowa, it might be for the 2nd Division. There's no telling. It really limits us in searching for that. But in general, the more information you have on what your relative did when they were here, the more we can narrow down where they likely were. That's how to read the Booklet of General Plans. Let us know in the comments section down below if you find any cool or interesting spaces on here that you'd be surprised that this ship had. If you're looking at these plans and comparing them to the earlier 1950s plans from Missouri and Wisconsin, also on the website, let us know what some weird changes are that you're able to point out. I love those sorts of little changes between the individual ships and the individual time periods. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State. We also receive a number of donations that allow us to function from both organizations and individuals like yourselves. And in particular, it's the individual donations that you guys have made that really help us creating the YouTube content. We initially started making one video a week, and because of the donations you guys have been giving us, we've been able to make this a larger part of our job, and we can now put out multiple videos a week. So remember to like, share, and subscribe so that you're notified when those new videos come out. And if you would like to keep supporting us, there's a link in the description for ways you can donate. Thanks for watching.